Imagine being completely bankrupt at 30 years old, with debts equivalent to millions of dollars today, being chased by creditors and having to flee Rome to save your own life. This is not the story of a modern businessman in crisis, but rather of the man who would become the most powerful emperor in history, Gaius Julius Caesar. The story you're about to hear is not just about a great conqueror, but about how to transform total financial ruin into the greatest empire the world has ever known. Every strategy Caesar used to rise from poverty to absolute power continues to be applied by leaders and entrepreneurs today. In 102 BC, a boy was born in Rome to a patrician family, but not among the richest or most powerful. The Caesars were nobles, yes, but they had lost much of their political influence and wealth over the generations. Young Julius grew up watching his family's fortune dwindle, while other patrician families accumulated immense power and riches. But Caesar possessed something that money couldn't buy, an almost supernatural charisma and an ability to read people that bordered on genius. Even as a teenager, he understood that in Rome, everything was about networks, alliances, and knowing exactly what people wanted to hear. His first strategic move came early. While other young patricians were content living off family money, Caesar deliberately chose the most expensive lifestyle possible. He threw lavish parties he couldn't afford, bought the finest clothes, hired the best teachers, and surrounded himself with luxury. This wasn't reckless spending, it was calculated investment in his image. You see, Caesar understood a fundamental truth about power that most people miss. Appearing wealthy and successful is often more important than actually being wealthy and successful. People want to associate with winners, and Caesar made sure everyone saw him as a winner, even when he was drowning in debt. By his mid-20s, Caesar had borrowed astronomical sums to fund his political career. In Roman society, you had to spend massive amounts to advance through the political ranks, funding public games, bribing voters, and maintaining the lifestyle expected of a leader. Caesar spent more than anyone else, and as a result, he owed more than anyone else. His debts were so enormous that his creditors began to panic. We're talking about sums that would equal tens of millions of dollars today. Most men would have been crushed by this burden, but Caesar saw it differently. He realized that when you owe small amounts, you have a problem. When you owe enormous amounts, your creditors have a problem. This is where Caesar's genius truly shone. Instead of hiding from his debts, he leveraged them. He convinced his creditors that their only hope of getting paid was to help him succeed. If Caesar failed, they lost everything. If he succeeded, they would be richly rewarded. Suddenly, some of Rome's wealthiest men had a vested interest in Caesar's success. But Caesar's real breakthrough came when he secured the position of Pontifex Maximus, Rome's highest religious office. This wasn't just about prestige, it came with legal immunity from prosecution for debt. As long as he held this sacred position, his creditors couldn't touch him. It was the ultimate strategic move, using political power to solve financial problems. With his creditors temporarily at bay, Caesar turned his attention to the one sure path to massive wealth in Rome, military conquest. But he needed an army, and armies were expensive. Once again, Caesar's solution was brilliant in its audacity. He convinced Rome's richest man, Marcus Crassus, to secretly fund his military campaigns. The deal was simple. Caesar would provide military glory and political advancement, while Crassus would handle the finances. Meanwhile, Caesar also allied with Pompey, Rome's greatest military hero, creating an unofficial triumvirate that controlled Roman politics. This partnership, known as the First Triumvirate, was essentially a business arrangement disguised as politics. Each man brought something to the table. Caesar brought charisma and political cunning, Pompey brought military reputation, and Crassus brought money. Together, they were unstoppable. Caesar parlayed this alliance into the governorship of Gaul, modern-day France and parts of surrounding regions. This appointment came with command of several legions and the legal right to wage war. For Caesar, it was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to transform debt into unimaginable wealth through conquest. The Gallic wars that followed were not just military campaigns, they were the greatest business venture in ancient history. Caesar systematically conquered tribe after tribe, each victory bringing massive amounts of gold, slaves, and territory. He carefully documented these conquests in his famous Commentaries, which served as both military reports and masterful propaganda pieces. Every battle Caesar won made him richer and more famous. He shared the wealth generously with his soldiers, ensuring their absolute loyalty. He sent regular payments to Rome, steadily paying down his debts while building a war chest for future political campaigns. Most importantly, he was building something no amount of money could buy, a legendary reputation. Caesar understood that wealth without reputation is powerless, but reputation without wealth is also powerless. He needed both, and the Gallic wars gave him both in abundance. Romans back home read his dispatches with fascination, following his adventures like a modern audience follows a television series. But Caesar's most brilliant strategic insight was recognizing that his success threatened the very men who had helped him achieve it. Pompey grew jealous of Caesar's military glory, while the Roman Senate feared Caesar's growing power and popularity. Caesar saw the writing on the wall. They would try to destroy him the moment he returned to Rome as a private citizen. This led to Caesar's most famous gamble. In 49 BC, standing at the Rubicon River with his army, Caesar faced a choice that would determine not just his fate, but the fate of Western civilization. Roman law forbade generals from bringing armies into Italy. Crossing the Rubicon meant civil war, but staying put meant political destruction and probably death. Caesar's decision to cross the Rubicon wasn't impulsive. It was the logical culmination of everything he had built. He had the loyalty of his soldiers, the support of the common people, and enough wealth to fund a campaign. Most importantly, he had nothing left to lose. His enemies in Rome were already planning his destruction. The civil war that followed was swift and decisive. Caesar's veteran legions, hardened by years of fighting in Gaul and personally loyal to their general, proved superior to Pompey's forces. Within 4 years, Caesar had defeated all his enemies and stood as the undisputed master of Rome. But even in victory, Caesar demonstrated the strategic thinking that had lifted him from bankruptcy to supreme power. He pardoned his enemies, showing clemency that shocked Roman society. He implemented popular reforms, winning over the masses while maintaining the support of his soldiers. He balanced the budget, paid off debts, and restored stability to Roman finances. Caesar had achieved something that seemed impossible. He had transformed personal bankruptcy into control of the greatest empire on earth. From fleeing creditors to commanding legions, from borrowing money to literally printing it, Caesar's rise was the ultimate rags to riches story. The strategies Caesar used are still applicable today. He understood that image matters as much as reality, that debt can be leverage if handled correctly, that partnerships are essential for ambitious projects, and that sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risk at all. He showed that reputation and relationships are more valuable than inherited wealth, that calculated boldness beats cautious mediocrity, and that when facing destruction, sometimes the only way forward is through complete commitment to victory. Caesar's story teaches us that financial ruin is not the end, but can be the beginning of something greater. Every setback can become a setup for a comeback if you have the vision, courage, and strategic thinking to transform obstacles into opportunities. When you feel overwhelmed by challenges, remember the man who went from debtor to dictator, from bankruptcy to building an empire that lasted 1,000 years. Caesar proved that with the right mindset and strategies, there are no limits to what one person can achieve. What impossible dream are you going to pursue? What empire are you going to build? The choice, like Caesar standing at the Rubicon, is entirely yours.